Hey guys, Graham here with another Quarantine Quiet Time. Today we're going to do things a little different. We're actually going to answer one of your questions that came in this last week. And this question actually came in from a good friend who was watching, and they were kind of asking like, hey, what did you mean when you said this? And they were asking specifically when I talked last week about the Trinity and how there is only one God mentioned in the Bible, and yet they're mentioned in three different personalities or personas or people, and how we didn't really have the language to explain all that. But his question was, what do you mean there's only one God mentioned in the Bible? Isn't there a bunch of gods mentioned in the Bible? Especially in the Old Testament, we hear all these different names, especially we hear the name Baal and Asherah. And if you really dig into some of these other religions, you can find out that when it just said, oh, they were worshiping their God, that their God actually had a name and he had, kind of his own powers and stuff like that. And then in the New Testament, in the world that Jesus lived in, the Romans were obsessed with religion. It's one reason why they let the Jews still be Jewish, is because they loved kind of religion and they loved gods and they respected what the Jews had done for so long. And the Romans had hundreds of gods, and they were everywhere. You would walk down the street and there would be a temple to this god, and there would be a little memorial to that god, and there'd be all kinds of stuff. So there really is hundreds of gods that are mentioned or alluded to throughout Scripture. So what did I mean when I said that Scripture only says that there's one God? And here's the difference: is Judaism, the Jewish religion, never claims that any of these other gods are legitimate. In fact, there's even stories in the Bible where they disprove the legitimacy of some of these other gods. The story that is super popular in like children's ministry and stuff is when Elijah, the prophet, actually goes toe-to-toe with these other prophets of Baal. And Baal is probably the god who is mentioned the most of a foreign country throughout the Bible. And he was the god of rain and making your crops grow and stuff like that. And and Elijah says, hey, your God's not legit. Like, I'll prove it to you. And we see that time and time again throughout the Old Testament, that the Jewish people, the Hebrews, Israelites, all the same group of people, just different names for them, never ever believed that any of these other gods were legitimate. Now, there are times when other nations looked at Israel's God and said, man, you guys got something. Like, you have something legitimate. We looked at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego last week, too. And the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, actually goes to throw them into the fire, and when they don't burn up, he says, I'm going to worship your God. Your God is legit. Your God is real. And so we see these stories throughout the Old and even in the New Testament, where we got the Jews saying, hey, yeah, there's these other gods. And when we write them out, we actually only use a little g when we write them out, because we say they're not legitimate. They're not a capital G kind of God. Like, you call them gods, but we don't call them gods. Like, interestingly enough, one of the words that we use for God in the Old Testament is Elohim. And it just means any kind of God. And you could use that, or they would use that word to describe Baal, and they would use it to describe Yahweh. But Yahweh had his own special name, which was Yahweh, that the Jews would never say. They were so enamored and so wholeheartedly believing in the fact that this was it. There was only one Yahweh, there's only one God. Everything else is just made up. Everything else is man-made religion and isn't legitimate. So, are there tons of gods mentioned throughout the Bible? Absolutely. Absolutely they are. Does the Jewish religion ever say, or does the Christian religion ever say that any of those other ones are legitimately a God like we think of God? Absolutely not. No. There's only one, and his name is Yahweh, and he is the only true God. So, hope that answers your question. Thanks for filing that in for us. And again, you can post us more questions, hit us up, social medias, or whatever, and we'll see you guys next time on the Quarantine Quiet Time. Peace out.